from Hearts Standard. My name is Joel Sked, and I'm delighted to be joined by Kieran Maguire, football finance expert and one half of the Price of Football podcast, plus University of Liverpool lecturer on football finance. Kieran, thank you very much for joining me, and how are you?
I'm good. I'm a Brighton fan. We've got our big match against Crystal Palace this weekend, so I'm slightly nervous. And I do the Price of Football podcast with Kevin Day, the comedian who's a Crystal Palace fan. So It's a little bit of tension when we're recording, but looking forward to it.
Good. Is that is it at Selhurst or is it down in Brighton?
It's at Selhurst, so they've got bragging rights over us at present because they won the FA Cup for the first time in their history last season, and they did the double over Brighton. So yes, we're hoping to recoup some of the advantages that they have over us.
Well, I'm sure there's no doubt we'll come on to speak about Bloom. There is a lot of Hearts fans who will be keeping an eye on Brighton, so I think you will be. There'll be many in your corner. Now, as I mentioned, you are a finance expert. I am very much not. So I reached out to yourself to speak about the latest Hearts accounts, which dropped late on Wednesday afternoon, rather than trying to figure it out myself. So I suppose just getting right into it to kick things off, Hearts said in their kind of summary that they're pleased with the accounts. They're a robust set of accounts. Should that be the case?
Yeah, I think if you start at the top, which is the money coming into the club, it is record revenues. So they will be pleased with that. At the same time, it was a record wage bill. So, we often talk about the prune juice effect in football, that the faster the money comes into the game through increased ticket sales, more broadcast money, and UEFA plays a big place in that in terms of solidarity payments and the commercial deals. All of those were good. What do you then do with the money? And what we've seen as far as Hearts are concerned is that they've managed to match that. The club is dependent upon the benevolence of the foundation and other donors. One of the directors put in a fair amount of money last year as a donation. But they got plenty of cash, partly due to the donation, partly due to the new shares being issued to Tony Bloom, who is we're quite aware of Tony at Brighton, as you can imagine. So I think that they are in a strong financial position, but they're in a strong financial position due to external factors rather than footballing factors.
Yeah, and we'll get into them shortly. And I suppose one of the things that I got asked yesterday was just about the various different kind of loss figures, and I was curious to know how they differ. So Hearts talked about a net operating loss of £400,000. In the account, it has a line which says the loss for the financial year is as £1.96 million. In a tweet, which I'll just flash up here, you noted that the underlying loss is at £13.6 million and the pre-tax loss is at £4.6 million. So are you able to give us a brief insight into the differences there and which one's probably the most, which ones are the real important ones?
Yeah, it's profit's a very abstract concept. I mean, when I talk about underlying profit, or loss, I'm saying purely from a footballing angle, that if we exclude player sales, because the issue with player sales is that they're very unpredictable and they're very volatile from season to season. So let's just park those. And also, if you sell all of your best players, then that's going to have consequences on the footballing side of things. So excluding the donations, excluding player sales, Hearts did have a quite sizable loss, and that's indicative of a club that's paying out practically all of its wages, all of its revenue in the form of wages. And if you want the football club to be successful, then you've got to pay competitive wages. So it's part of the way the industry works. Then if you take into account the donations, then if you take into account the player sales and tax, those figures start to change. So I perhaps focus too much on what I refer to as the underlying loss, because it can be distorted very easily by external factors. Can we rely on one of the directors to donate £5 or £6 million a year to the club every season? I don't think you can. Can you rely on the club to have significant player sales at profits every year? If you look at every other club in Scotland, with the possible exception of Celtic, who appear to use that as their business model, they tend to sell a player to the continent or to south of the border each year. Every other club is quite erratic, so that's the approach I usually take. At the same time, profit at a net level is low, and they did benefit from the donations and they did have the player sales, so you can't exclude them. You just can't rely on them to be replicated every single year.
And in terms of the I think the big question between Hearts fans was and Hearts had noted within their kind of spreadsheet a loss for the financial year as £1.96 million, and then the net operating loss of £400,000. Is that just is that essentially the difference between the player sales being taken into account?
It's tax and interest. It's sort of the boring things which excites accountants, and which we shouldn't be discussing in the pub prior to the match. Sadly, I've become sort of south of the border as my position has become slightly more elevated than is warranted by my ability, I can assure you. I do get approached by strangers in pubs who want me to go through every single line of a set of accounts, and that can be from the smallest club in the country to the largest. And I keep saying to them, this isn't why you fell in love with the game.
Yeah. In terms of the more positive aspects of the accounts, what are the things that are impressive and should be of kind of warmth to the Hearts fans who are seeing these figures?
Well, I think the fact that we have got record revenues at Hearts is to be applauded. I think there's a fair chance that can be replicated this season, because clearly they've made a magnificent start to the season. We don't know just how well the Jamestown analytics model is going to work, but I know from my own experience as a Brighton fan, the ability to buy low and sell high has certainly accelerated since using that particular model. So that can be then used combined with the greater match day receipts, the opportunities that will come should Hearts have a good season this year and qualify for a European competition next season and make progress in that. I think those are positives. If money's coming in from shareholders, that money never has to be repaid. And it's the same with donations. If a club goes down the route of borrowing money, yes, on the one hand, if you borrow money, it goes into your bank account. But by definition, a loan is something that has to also go through the exit door. So the routes that Hearts have taken here, I think, are the preferable ones from a sustainability point of view. Clearly, as a fan, you would want the donations and the share investments to be replicated on a regular basis. That doesn't tend to be the case, but now it really comes down to the individuals involved. The club's in a strong position with that amount of cash in the bank as well. I've seen some other accounts recently where cash is heading in the other direction. I go, well, if they have another year like that, I think we've got big problems. And I'm aware of other clubs in Scotland at present, and it wouldn't be appropriate to name them, where I'm extremely twitchy about their future. And I'm talking sort of in the next weeks and months, as opposed to sort of on a long-term basis.
And yeah, I think it's the big thing. James Anderson has been a key benefactor over the years for Hearts, and it's always been the message from Hearts that they account for this money within their expenses, so they know it's going to come in, and that's where it's and so they can plan ahead with that. On the flip side, is there anything that stood out from you within the accounts that did cause cause some concern, or something that maybe kind of raised your eyebrows and not in a good way?
No, I mean the fact that the additional monies are being invested in talent is what you want as a fan, because nobody's going to give you an open top bus parade for having the highest bank account at the end of the season in the club's history. It's a non-issue. I don't see any negatives apart from the fact was that were it not for James Anderson, if it was not for the solidarity payments from UEFA and so on, and the magnificent contribution for the foundation, these are amazing things. We would then have problems. So
Yeah.
I often say to people, it's great until it's not great, and football clubs don't go bust, owners go bust, and certainly I've seen south of the border where owners have come in, they have put large amounts of money into the club, and either their circumstances change. I think an example of that would have been Roman Abramovich and Chelsea when he became persona non grata, so therefore he couldn't put money into the football club, and a crisis arose on a short-term basis, or their attitude changes. And we've seen that with some clubs where people have come in, they've been fantastic benefactors. After 5 or 6 years, the club which they bought, which was 12th in the division, is now 9th in the division. They're 100 or 200 million pounds down, and their kids are going, Dad, that's our inheritance. It's just gone on yet another underperforming centre forward from Slovakia, and the owner goes, yeah, actually, I'm now going to bail out. But if the club's got used to if you get used to that level of expenditure and it's being supported by the owner, if the owner drops out, potentially you've got a problem. So that's always the case. Hearts have got magnificent benefactors. If I was the fans, I would be cheering their name. If I saw them crossing the road, I would leap in front of any cars that went near them, because they do make a genuine difference.
And just on that, you obviously look at a number of different clubs and their accounts. How are Hearts unique in the extent of how they operate with the benefactors with the foundation? How do they compare to other clubs?
They do outstandingly well, I think, compared to the vast majority of clubs. If we appreciate Scottish football, we don't understand Scottish football in England. Let's be perfectly honest about this. But at Celtic, no money comes in from the owners at all. Now, and they are self-sufficient, and that's reflected in the fact that their wages is a far lower proportion of revenue than that of Hearts. Rangers have had good times and bad times, and also your Hearts and Hibs and other clubs have been on the wrong side of owners. I think things are a lot more settled now. In England, if we take the second tier of English football, on average, clubs are losing £400,000 a week, and they are reliant upon people who some people would describe them as mugs. And they are putting in that 400 grand a week. So that is quite a common feature, in the sense that clubs are being subsidised, but that's quite often by loans. What we're not seeing at Hearts is the loans to that extent.
And just on, before I go on to ask a wee bit about Tony Bloom, just on the player sales and player tradings, that a big thing was made by Hearts this time around, because they've not been great at selling players, but they've had a gain on sale of players of 1.3 million. And I was looking at the accounts, and it said that the sale of player registrations was, I think it was 2.2 million, and then underneath had carrying value of costs of player registration sold or terminated was 918,000. Are you able to explain what what that is essentially in layman's terms?
Yeah, accounting for football players is a weird and wonderful science, which has kept me in a job for many a year. What happens is that, let's say that you buy a player for £1 million and you give him a 5-year contract. So what happens as far as the accounts is concerned is you say, well, it's a bit like renting a player for 200 grand a year, because you take £1 million, divide that by 5, which is the life of your contract. So that gives us a decrease. So each year the player would start off £1 million. Next year he'd be valued by the accountants at 800, then 600, then 400, then 200 and 0. And when you sell that player, you compare the sale price to the value that the accountants have given the players. Now, if you've ever seen an accountant play football, and I used to play in the Manchester Accountants Football League, you realise that they don't know very much about football. They're very good at collecting the subscriptions. Yeah, very good. Match your match fee. They're very good at that, and they're very good at putting the tables together. But the footballing side of things, that they're not great at. So, but what they will do is that they will compare the value of the player, which decreases each year because the player is getting closer and closer to the end of the contract, to the sale price. So
Right.
let's say that we sell that player who has been, let's say that we sell that player after 1 year for 1.5 million. So what the club would say is that we bought him for £1 million. He's reduced in value by 200,000, so his book value is 800,000. We sell him for 1.5, so we've got an accounting profit of 700,000. So that's how the system works, and we introduce this word called amortization, which baffles people. And when I go to my grave, my greatest achievement in life is getting the word amortization to trend on Twitter a few years ago, and I thought, that's it. This is my ultimate peak.
It could be you may well be the first person to ever have that on a gravestone as well. The word amortization. So that's
not dead, just amortizing.
Yeah. So just on that, because it says in terms of sale of player registrations was 2.2 million. So is that essentially Hearts sold players for 2.25 million?
That's right. Yes, and then you deduct the book value, and the difference is your profit.
Right, that makes a lot of sense, because again, people were questioning the £1.3 million player sales, considering the number of players and some of the players that are sold. But that makes a lot more sense. Now, Tony Bloom, as you mentioned, you're a Brighton fan, and I spoke to you, I think, 12 months ago about Tony Bloom when it was first revealed that he was going to be involved in the club, and Hearts noted that because his investment of £9.86 million in June is an equity investment, this is not reflected in the profit loss figures shown in the income statement or referenced above. So what does that essentially mean, and will his investment be reflected in next year's accounts?
Well, his investment is reflected in the sense that, as I mentioned earlier, Hearts now have more cash than perhaps you would have expected. Because if you've lost money during the year, you would have expected the cash balance to go down. Why has Hearts' cash balance increased? It's because the donations which have gone into the accounts, but Tony's money, you've increased your shares, you've increased your cash. None of that will appear in Hearts from a profit point of view, but it does give the club the ability to recruit players, because most transfer deals these days are done on credit. So if you've got 2 or 3 clubs who are both trying to acquire a player, let's say for £500,000, and one of them saying, well, we want to pay in 2 or 3 installments, and Hearts say, well, we've got 10 million in the bank, we can give you cash straight up, we can pay 100%. I think that's where it's going to benefit the club. And we've seen that whilst the purchases of players since Tony and Jamestown have come into the equation have been relatively modest, they have been quite laser focused, and they have the capacity. As a Brighton fan, all Brighton fans want Hearts to win the Scottish Premiership, because we all love Tony, because what he's done at Brighton is off the scale, and for some people who say that's a one-off, to see that replicated elsewhere and he's also his model's been sold to Grimsby Town in the fourth tier of English football, and they beat Manchester United in the cup 2 months ago. So those people will say that it's a one-off. We're going, well, actually, Brighton have done it, Hearts have done it, Grimsby have done it. So that money will be able to be used by the club in the January transfer window, should they want to strengthen. Hoping that they will still be well ahead in the Scottish Premiership, and of course that will attract players because A, players want to win medals, but B, there is the potential to be playing in the ultimate European competition next season.
And just on the signing of players, and we kind of touched on the player trading and the fact that Brighton have done so well. Is that do you feel that Hearts going forward can be less reliant on those benefactors, and because of Jamestown and the way that they operate, that can be a bit more hopeful of bringing more money from player sales? I know you said that it's not something that clubs you can kind of bank on, but with the way that Hearts will operate now, that there's kind of a greater security because of just how effective Jamestown has been.
I think you can be more confident. Brighton have repaid Tony Bloom £100 million. That is unheard of in English football. As a result of the Jamestown secret sauce. Nobody knows what's in the secret sauce, but the ability to buy low and sell high, and there's no such thing as a foolproof method, but if you can go from 5 out of 10 transfers working to 7 or 8 out of 10 transfers working, in terms of A, contributing to the club, and B, the player becomes more attractive to other clubs, so you sell at a profit, then that certainly is a model which works. Hearts cannot be successful in Scottish football by being bigger. I was talking to somebody well connected to Scottish football a couple of days ago, and we were going through the finances, and the conclusion was, and by all means tell me if I'm wrong here, a third of the population is Celtic, a third of the population and the revenue is Rangers, and the other third is split between the other 44 clubs. So Hearts are going to be one of the bigger players, but they're still going to be within that other batch of clubs. So they can't succeed by being bigger. So therefore they have to succeed by being smarter. I've met Tony Bloom twice, and I'm not saying this. And I'm an associate professor at university. I deal with super smart people who I work. My colleagues, especially those who work in tropical medicine and dentistry and all of these amazing subjects. I'm streetwise. I'm not super smart like they are. Tony Bloom is the smartest guy I've met in my life. And you sit and you listen and you realise that he is thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead in every conversation, even when he's talking about something about football. And to utilise his abilities for Hearts, I think is a way where they can be competitive, and I know that he's said some things when he first became connected with the club, which probably surprised the media, possibly surprised Hearts fans as well, in the sense of we want to be competitive within the next 10 years. He said exactly the same thing at Brighton, and he's actually got more ambition than the Brighton fan base. He said to the fans 5 or 6 years ago, I want Brighton to be a top 10 Premier League club competing in Europe. And we all looked at each other and said, oh, what's Tony been smoking? That's bonkers, because the first 3 seasons in the Premier League it was 15th, 16th, 15th, and then is amazing mind. Brighton were playing in the Europa League. They were winning at Ajax. They were winning against Marseille and all of these Galactico clubs, big clubs with amazing histories. They have been in the top 10 of English football now on a few occasions. So when he says these things, it's not arrogance. He's not saying things for the sake of saying things. He says these things because he can believe. So he wants to be a disruptor and Hearts are a fantastic vehicle through which to disrupt the current duopoly that exists in Scottish football.
Yeah, it was a moment where he's reflecting on it now. I was in the room when he told the press that he believed that Hearts could split the Old Firm this season, and I was thinking, I thought it'd be too soon, and then it was almost like he knew something that everyone else didn't, and he looks like he's going to be hopefully spot on with that prediction. At the very least, who knows what else could happen this season. Kieran, thank you very much for that. That was brilliant insight, and I'm sure everyone, the Hearts fans, will have taken a hell of a lot from that and learned a lot, like I have as well. I will allow you to, if you want, publicise your podcast or anything else that you've got going on.
Well, yes, I'm the co-host of the bafflingly successful Price of Football podcast. We've just been nominated for Best Podcast of the Year. We cover every single club at every single level of football, and we've interviewed people from sports ministers to pie sellers. We don't care, but we look at there's 1,000,001 podcasts out there about football. So we said, let's do something a bit left field and look at the business side of the game. I'm very blessed to be working with Kevin Day. He's a fantastically experienced broadcaster. He's a very funny guy as well. The only downside about him is that he supports Crystal Palace.
Well, I would urge any Hearts fans to go and check that out if you're interested in the finance side of football, and again, being able to learn a bit more about that side of things. But once again, Kieran, thank you very much for coming on and giving us excellent insight into Hearts finances, and I'll provide some details in the description below. Thank you very much to everyone who listened. Please do subscribe and continue to support Hearts Standard, and it's much appreciated. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.